He was lightning fast. His small frame and ability to maneuver allowed him to weasel out of any corner and escape through the smallest of holes. And he could do this all while being chased by angry shopkeepers he had just robbed, or the police. Because of this, he earned the nickname on the streets of Cleveland as the Weasel, Jimmy the Weasel Fratianno. Carl Sifakis notes, if that won him the admiration of the underworld, it was nothing compared to the high esteem he enjoyed among mob leaders due to his willingness to kill even good friends if ordered from above. He was involved in 11 murders by his own account. Born in Naples, Italy on November 14, 1913, his birth name was Aladena. He later changed it to Jimmy because, according to him, Aladena sounded like a broad's name. Like so many caught in the poverty of Europe at the time, his family dreamed of a better life. Just 4 months after his birth, the Fratiannos immigrated to the United States, eventually settling in the Buckeye State. His father, Antonio Fratianno, worked as a landscape contractor and was known as a serious, sober man, a good provider, and an absolute autocrat of his household. By his own account, Jimmy wasn't very interested in school, and therefore he wasn't a good student. He fell in with a group of troublemakers and ended up getting himself expelled. With very few options before him, he headed for the streets. He got into boxing for a brief period, going by the name Kid Weasel, but Jimmy never really liked his nickname and asked his friends not to call him that. Committing petty thefts and burglaries, he eventually came to the attention of Cleveland's growing criminal syndicate. He went to work for a gambler named Johnny Martin, who operated a high-stakes poker game. Martin took Jimmy under his wing, teaching him how to make money off of gambling and how to be a successful bookie. But the Weasel wanted more. He fell in with a gang of enforcers for the Teamsters Union, who were trying to organize parking lots in and around Cleveland. And it was around this time that law enforcement soon took notice of Jimmy the Weasel Fratianno. Along with Anthony Del Santer and future boss of the Rochester crime family, Frank Valenti, Jimmy Fratianno and his pals began knocking over non-connected gambling games, and his fortunes grew. He was first arrested at 19 on suspicion of rape, but he was not charged. 2 years later, he was acquitted of robbery charges, and in 1937 he was again charged, and this time convicted of robbery, and he spent more than 7 years in the Ohio State prison system. While in prison, Fratianno met and befriended powerful Detroit mobster Thomas Yanni Licavoli, who happened to mention that he had a good friend making inroads in Los Angeles. "If you ever need to lie low," he said to Jimmy, "look up Johnny Roselli on the West Coast." Paroled in 1945 and believing Cleveland was becoming too hot, Fratianno and his wife Jewel moved to Los Angeles. He took Licavoli's advice and fell in with underworld figure Johnny Roselli, who became his future sponsor and lifelong friend, as well as Jewish mobster Mickey Cohen. 2 years later, with the recommendation of Roselli, Fratianno became a made man in the Los Angeles crime family headed by Jack Dragna. His big claim to fame at this time was his participation in one of Hollywood's most notorious gangland slayings, that of Anthony Brancato and his associate Anthony Trombino. They were two up-and-coming mobsters who were performing many daring robberies without the sanction of the Los Angeles family and were therefore drawing a lot of unwanted attention. Fratianno led a squad of hitmen who shot and killed Brancato and Trombino in their car on August 6, 1951. Employing the lessons he learned in Cleveland, Fratianno began a bookmaking and gambling operation with Frank Bompensero. By 1952, his reputation as a good earner got him promoted to capo. Jimmy was moving up in the mob. One writer notes, Fratianno once took bets at the racetrack in Hialeah, Florida, where he was briefly introduced to infamous New York crime boss Lucky Luciano. In 1956, Jack Dragna died, and Frank DeSimone became the new boss. But Jimmy didn't like DeSimone that much. In fact, he wasn't a big fan of his former boss, Jack Dragna. Fratianno had respect for the New York families and Chicago, but he referred to DeSimone as a deadhead and the LA crime family as the Mickey Mouse Mafia. During this period of his life, Fratianno described it as a roller coaster, a lot of ups and downs. In the mid-1950s, he was on a downhill slide. He was hit with an extortion charge and was convicted, and spent another 6 years in prison, being paroled in 1960. In his book, The Last Mafioso, Jimmy complained that when he went to prison, he owned several businesses in Los Angeles and had over $100,000 on the streets in Shylock money, and that Louis Tom Dragna was the only member of the family who gave his wife any type of financial support, and that everyone else just ripped him off. After he was paroled and disgusted with the LA crime family, he transferred his talents to the powerful Chicago outfit. According to J. Robert Nash, he then went into the trucking business and earned close to $1.4 million. Though connected with Chicago, he stayed in California, shuttling back and forth between Los Angeles and San Francisco. He attempted on numerous occasions to gain a foothold in Las Vegas, and years later he would lament that Vegas was his kind of town, but that he could never get lucky there. By 1975, Dominic Brooklier was boss of Los Angeles, but he was headed to prison for a 20-month stretch, and Louis Tom Dragna was named acting boss. Dragna said he would accept the position on the condition that he and Jimmy Fratianno ran it together, and everyone agreed. Fratianno took his new position to heart, traveling the country, making deals, and forming connections with other crime families from across the United States. He saw the opportunity of being named acting boss as a way to become the permanent boss of the family. Fratianno was hoping that by making the family stronger and boosting its reputation, that he'd earn support to take over the family even when Brooklier was released from prison. But then things took a wrong turn. His old pal, and the only guy he ever really trusted, Frank Bompensero, made someone angry, and he was marked for death. Jimmy was livid. Who and why would give such an order? It was at this point that Fratianno felt that he was being tricked into becoming acting boss, a position which required him to transfer back to the LA family from the Chicago outfit. And due to his close relationship with Bompensero, it was assumed that Fratianno could easily lay a trap and murder his old friend. But Jimmy never wanted the contract and stalled until it was given to another mob associate. After serving 16 months of the 20-month sentence, Brooklier was released from prison. On February 11, 1977, he announced he was ready to resume his position as boss. And the result was, the Weasel was knocked down a rung. Because of Jimmy's success in his absence, Brooklier became jealous. He began spreading rumors that he never gave Jimmy the rank of acting boss. Other rumors were also circulated that Fratianno was running a separate crew trying to undercut Brooklier. Again, Fratianno felt he was being set up, but this time to be hit. But the one thing no one in the underworld suspected was Jimmy the Weasel Fratianno, as early as 1970 and perhaps earlier, had become an FBI informant. By his own word, he wasn't ratting out his friends and family. Instead, he was using the FBI to get information out of them to avoid local law enforcement, much like Greg Scarpa and James Whitey Bulger would later do. Carl Sifakis writes, Fratianno found it worthwhile to get the law on his side by feeding certain information and gaining a special measure of freedom thereafter. While spilling minor facts to the FBI, Jimmy the Weasel kept maneuvering himself all the way up to becoming the acting boss of the Los Angeles crime family. After the death of Tony Del Santer and during his wake back in Cleveland, Jimmy learned that his old pals, specifically James Licavoli, had the codes for two top echelon FBI informers and was edging close to getting the names. Fratianno felt the pressure mounting and considered three options to disconnect himself from this predicament. He could enter the Witness Protection Program, flee the country, or kill his enemies within the organization. And by his own words, he actively pursued all three options. On October 6, 1977, mob hitman Ray Ferrito was arrested for the murder of Irish mobster Danny Green and implicated Fratianno as one of the masterminds. Jimmy now saw little hope. He was facing life in prison or death by the mob, and according to him, he had one chance to save his own skin. And Jimmy the Weasel Fratianno flipped and turned government witness. Unlike Joe Valachi, a lowly soldier who wasn't privy to much information about the Genovese crime family or the other 4 New York crime families, Fratianno had inside information on some of the most powerful underworld figures, including Santo Trafficante Jr. and Carlos Marcello, and their role in the CIA's Operation Mongoose to kill Cuban dictator Fidel Castro. As a government witness, Jimmy spilled all he knew. J. Robert Nash explains, during the next 10 years, Fratianno fingered such underworld figures as Dominic Brooklier, Carmine Jr. Persico, and Frank Funzi Thierry. His testimony led to the investigation of the Teamsters Pension Fund, overseen by Alan Dorfman in Chicago, and the skimming of Las Vegas casino profits by mobsters in Chicago, Milwaukee, and Kansas City. Fratianno also implicated Frank Sinatra in a 1976 benefit concert scheme which netted the New York families $400,000. The Weasel was instrumental in the conviction of 30 mobsters, including 6 mafia bosses. In 1981, after testifying for the government, Fratianno entered the Federal Witness Protection Program. He enjoyed his years as a celebrity gangster with appearances on CBS's 60 Minutes, The Oprah Winfrey Show, and various television documentaries. Once when asked if he thought he was a better snitch than a made guy, Jimmy replied, "No way, no way. I proved myself. That's why the bosses promoted me. I could do a lot of things other people couldn't do. I could set people up. I could kill them. I was a good money maker. I was the guy anytime they wanted somebody killed in LA, I got the contract, okay? I killed half the guys that were killed in LA during the time I was there. So the boss knew what he was doing. He picked me when he had something tough to do. But as the old adage goes, all good things must come to an end." Jimmy not only outlived his usefulness to the mob, but also the FBI. He was eventually bounced from witness protection. Some said it was due to his demands for more money from the government. Others stated it was because of numerous infractions, including 2 books he wrote and going on a tour. Still others opined it was because they didn't want the program perceived to be a retirement plan for aging mobsters. Whatever the reason, Fratianno was furious and remained bitter toward the government for the remainder of his life. "You just don't take a guy after 10 years and throw him out on the street," he screamed. And though there remained a $500,000 bounty on his head, on June 30th, 1993, at the age of 79, Aladena, Jimmy the Weasel Fratianno, died peacefully in Oklahoma from complications related to Alzheimer's. He remains one of the most prominent and exceptional mobsters in the history of the now dwindling Los Angeles crime family that he once briefly led during the 1970s. One final note. Towards the end of his life, he told a reporter that he regretted ever joining the mob. "If I knew what I know today, they would have never gotten me into any organization, because all I did was make money for everybody else. I was a good hustler. I didn't know what I was getting into. It's something that, after thinking about it all these years, I'm sorry I ever belonged to. If I wasn't involved, I'd have been a millionaire today."